As I mentioned in the previous lecture, there was tension between two major groups during the 1920s. The traditionalists who were living in rural areas and modern urbanites who were living in the city. Now, there were many different things that these two groups disagreed with, but we're going to focus on six of them. Now, the first one's going to be something called prohibition. This is prohibition of alcohol. Now, you might be somewhat familiar with this issue in the 18th and 21st Amendments, but we will go into detail and talk about that. We're also going to talk about birth control. This really was a huge, huge issue in the 1920s, and really we saw tremendous growth of use of birth control in the 1920s and family planning, people deciding when and when not to have a family. Number three, we're going to talk about creationism versus evolution. Tremendous social um, tension in the 1920s, and we'll talk about specifically about a trial that occurred in the 1920s. We'll talk about the role of women in society because women kind of started coming into their own as far as is demanding that they become equal participants in society. Very, very early stages of this, but we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the early push for equal rights, specifically for Black Americans. Many people made the mistake of thinking, well, the Civil War was over, Reconstruction was over. Why should we talk about these things? You'll understand after we talk about that why they needed to be not why they need to be talked about. And then finally, we'll talk about jazz music because jazz music and something called the Harlem Renaissance was absolutely huge during the 1920s. We'll talk about these six things.